Cops, have you written tickets to other cops? What happened during and after? Story 1. The only time I think I have ever pulled over / encountered another law enforcement officer is traffic accident related. One accident I witnessed myself while investigating another accident. Roads were icy and we had about 5 accidents one after another. I watched this deputy cause the accident mostly due to his bald tires. I cited him. I got called into a neighboring city to investigate a traffic accident where the cop was at fault. Had to cite him as well. That being said, I've been cited by other cops. Recently I was driving to Vegas and a state trooper got me. I had a firearm on the console next to me and notified him. Let him know it was right there in view and I was a cop. He cited me for the full amount over just because I was a cop and should know better. One of our officers got arrested for DUI last year by our neighboring agency. Got arrested on a Friday, quit the following Tuesday. Another one. Got called onto the highway to investigate an accident involving a trooper in her patrol vehicle. She rear-ended the person in front of her. Watching the dash camera in her car, traffic began to slow, everyone started to skid due to black ice, and she bumped the vehicle in front of her. I did not cite her, but did list it as at fault on the state accident form. Story 2. A police officer came into the Home Depot I work at and tried to return a weed whacker because it didn't work. He was still in uniform. We explained that because A, he didn't have a receipt, and B, the particular model he was trying to return was pretty old, that we don't even sell it anymore, and had it for a while that it couldn't be returned. He basically said that he was a cop and that we were committing a crime for selling him a faulty weed whacker. He then proceeded to walk over to the garden center, pick up a brand new weed whacker, and walk out the door with it. This is theft. Police were called, and we all watched a police officer get arrested. Crazy. Story 3. A friend's father was the commander of the local state police post. He lived by a railroad track that had been out of use for several decades, yet there was still a stop sign at the crossing by his house. Everyone knew this sign was obsolete, and no one stopped for it. He was pulled over by a local town police officer and issued a ticket for running the stop sign. Officer told my friend's father, "Just because you are a state patrolman doesn't give you the right to run this stop sign." A couple days later, friend's father was going to lunch in his state cruiser, and the town officer speeds by him in his town cruiser. State trooper pulls him over and gives him a speeding ticket. Friend's father tells him, "Just because you are a town cop and driving a police car doesn't give you the right to speed and break the law when you are not responding to a call." Story 4. Not me, but my old criminal justice teacher, who used to be a cop, once told us a story about how he got pulled over by a cop from a different city, but still the same county. He tried telling him he was a cop and showed his badge, but the cop wasn't having it. He got so annoyed he got out of his car and walked up to the cop writing the ticket and started mouthing off to him, which definitely didn't help. The next couple of months, my teacher's city and the other cop city got into a ticket war and would write each other tickets if they saw that they were a cop from one of the two cities. So basically, they got into a police ticket war. Story 5. Yes, nothing scandalous or anything. It was something basic that I would not typically ticket for. I think failing to stop when entering a public road from a business or something. Anyway, the individual immediately pulled out some out-of-state law enforcement ID instead of his license. I had to awkwardly tell him to provide the license, insurance, registration, and he went on about his years of service in whatever state. The rest of the stop went as usual, once I could get him to provide the documentation. I ran his information and served him a citation. It drives me crazy when people try and pull the LEO card. Just be cool. He must have pleaded guilty and paid it though, because I had no further involvement. Story 6. I worked as a tribal officer for 25 plus years, and I had issued tickets to other officers, correctional officers, and politicians. It didn't matter to me who that person was that I had arrested. I also arrested other cops and ordered my own brother to be arrested. I wasn't the primary officer or on scene. The responding officers was trying to be helpful by letting me know so I could take him home. I was a sergeant at the time and never gave breaks to officers or family members. Nothing ever happened to me. I was threatened, but nothing ever came from it. Speaking as a chief of police was different. When I was being interviewed, I told the tribal council, who did the hiring for the chief position, that I don't play politics. I did my job and got things done. 14 months later, I was. I lied and told that the tribal council was talking about me, and by the time I got there, I was removed. My appeals process was never followed either. Story 7. My dad was a cop who got pulled over one night by highway patrol while he was off duty and he tried showing the guy his badge. But the highway patrolman grabbed it from him and threw it on the side of the road. Well, my dad was pissed, and so were a lot of the other officers when they found out. So in retaliation, my dad's friend that next week pulled over a highway patrolman who was on his way to work in uniform and gave him a ticket. This started a massive feud between the police department and the highway patrol, to the point that the higher-ups had to get involved and tell these grown men to grow up. Being a cop back in the day sounded like it was a lot of fun. Story 8. Not me, but my pastor was the police chaplain in our town. He owed a sheriff's deputy a ticket for parking his cruiser in a no-parking zone. It was either a school zone or a fire hydrant, and it wasn't for police business, so he couldn't argue out of it. Disagreement from the deputy about he's a cop, and you can't ticket cops. About 3 weeks later, my youth group has a trip to go bowling in a city the next county over. Well, crazy deputy decides to pull out a turn through the grass median and pull over my pastor with a bunch of us high schoolers. Pulls our pastor out and walks him back to his cruiser to give him a ticket for speeding. I'm not sure if the pastor wasn't speeding. Pastor comes back and says he got a speeding ticket and wonders what the deputy is doing in the next county over. And not like a stone's throw from the line. We're talking miles over the line where he shouldn't be. My town had recently had a big stink about our local cops not being where they should be, so that the sheriff's office was doing that too riled some folks. Story 9. My wife is a trooper. She was driving to work one morning with the cruiser as she was double-backing shifts. On the highway, a car comes flying up from behind her that devices to pass her and a bunch of other cars at a speed high enough that she decides to pull them over. Never pass the highway-paced car, kids. Guy pulls over. She does all the normal cop stuff, then gets out and starts walking up. She notices the guy hiding something out the window at her, walks closer, and sees it's a badge. She acknowledges the guy, asks for license, registration, insurance, and he keeps pointing the badge at her. She asks again for his info. He shows her the badge harder, which just further annoyed her. She acknowledges the badge, asks again for his info. He finally relented and gave it over. She wrote him a ticket. He goes to work to his tiny local station and complains to his boss about the bitch trooper who pulled him over and gave him attitude. His boss calls her boss. Her boss sends his boss the recording of the stop. He is no longer an officer. I have a feeling his boss was looking for any reason to get rid of him, and is now a security guard at a hospital. Story 10. Placed in a smaller town, 20,000 pop, for 8 years. I was a military transplant and didn't know anyone locally when I was hired. Lots of good old boys and friends of friends that could get away with almost anything. Had a city councilwoman who believed no parking signs on her street didn't pertain to her. One particular shift about 2 a.m., out of sheer frustration, I guess, I found her truck parked in the street and decided to wake her and politely ask her to move it. Thank God for body cameras. Next morning at 9 a.m., I was awoken by a phone call from my superior that a formal complaint had been filed for vulgar language and intimidation by said councilwoman. Again, thank God for body cameras. Story 11. Father is a retired police officer who tells this story of one of his partners. Partner was driving up I-95 on family vacation when they got pulled over for speeding in the Maryland/Delaware area. Partner tells the other cop something along the lines of, "Hey brother, I'm on the job." Cop responds, "You're no brother of mine." Ticket is issued. Partner for many years to come keeps a laminated copy of ticket in pocket with ticket book. One day partner is working when they get a call for an accident/disabled vehicle in one of the major tunnels in the NYC area. Partner responds in low, and behold, it is a cop from so many years ago, with family in town for family vacation. Cop tries to pull the "I'm on the job" routine, to which the partner replies, "Yes, I remember you," and proceeds to remove the laminated ticket and hand it back to the cop. Vehicle was subsequently impounded and summons issued. Story 12. I was issued a citation once. Coming home from vacation, it's a 10-hour drive. I had been obeying all traffic laws, but when we hit my state, and then my county, I felt safe and stepped on it. Lit up with blue lights almost 2 minutes later. I immediately noticed a second officer staying back by the vehicle. Since it's customary for officers in my area to have their own unit, I figured this guy was a trainee. He identified himself, his agency, and reason for stop. I produced my driver's license, insurance, and registration, and politely informed him that I had a gun in the vehicle. He asked if I had a concealed license. I said no. That should have led him to ask me why I was carrying, and at that point, I would have informed him I was an off-duty deputy sheriff. He didn't just said okay and walked off. 10 minutes later, he comes back with a citation, asked me for my phone number to write in the citation, and the name of my employer. So I said something county sheriff's office, I'm County 45. At this point, he asked me why I didn't tell him I was a cop. I told him that it wasn't something I was allowed to do off the bat like that, and I wasn't playing that card. Took my citation and drove off. Got a call 2 minutes later from his FTO apologizing and asked me to pull over and wait on him. He voided the citation and apologized. Nothing for him to apologize for, but I did tell him he needed to address the whole "I have a gun" thing with his rookie. Story 13. Not a cop, but I did have this encounter with a cop that ended with him being arrested. I was living in a fairly gun-friendly state. It was Pennsylvania. Carry permits not required for a pistol, unless you were carrying one concealed, including transporting one in the cabin of your car. I had one for work. My background was as an insurance adjuster. I found myself, for a time, doing insurance fraud investigation for a private investigator. After an incredibly overzealous neighbor decided to assert dominance over the parking spot in front of his house by smashing my windshield with a baseball bat, I was in the car, and I was watching someone a block away that had nothing to do with this clown. It was decided that I would be carrying from then on. After a very long day of surveillance that started at 4 a.m., I stopped by the gas station at the end of my block to fill up the tank and get some snacks before tucking in for the night. I had a rare full weekend off, and I was itching to get home. As I was paying, I must have shifted my coat to where the guy behind me in line saw I had a gun holstered on my hip. He interrupts my transaction to demand to know if I have a carry permit. I tell said stranger to mind his own business, and I continue paying. Concerned stranger pulls out a badge and tells me that he is a municipal police officer of a small town about 10 miles away. He again demands my permit and ID. I observe that we are not in said small town 10 miles away, and therefore, here in larger town beneath our feet, he is just a regular citizen. He informs me that I am not to leave as I'm being detained. He's calling the city police and I'm in deep crap, his words, for resisting. I just want to get my beef jerky, chips, and Mountain Dew home. But okay, apparently we're doing this. City police arrive within about 10 minutes. They separate us. City cop asks me about the gun. Do you have a permit? Yep, here it is. I'm also an insurance investigator. I just got off work. I hand him the permit. My employer's ID card and the badge, issued by the county in that state. Cop is super chill. He goes back to his car, comes back a few minutes later, and hands me everything. Thanks me for not being an idiot. All the while, Barney Fife is being a complete idiot and is making demands of the city cops. This guy basically wanted me charged with everything shy of murder, and they weren't complying because, well, I didn't break any laws. Apparently, when he wouldn't show some stranger his ID didn't work, he decided to up his game by telling the cop that I looked like I was about to rob the store and was just going for my gun when he stopped me. Now, this was a special kind of stupid move for a few reasons. Not the least of which being that there were witnesses to him being an asshole, and it was a convenience store with surveillance cameras. It didn't rise to that level, however, as a quick conversation with a clerk indicated he was full of crap. So I'm about to head out when one of them says to him, I wasn't aware that Town X had its own police department. When did you start there? Well, I'm actually the town constable, but if you read the state constitution, that allows me to serve as the chief law enforcement officer of the town where I'm elected. All kinds of nope. Cop cuts him off and tells him to put his hands behind his back. To my dying days, I think my happiest memory may be recalling the look of confused horror on his face when he realized that these cops weren't going to comply with his little arrest fantasy and that he was going to jail. Story 14. My grandmother was a police officer some time ago, and while not another officer, she ended up arresting a local government official. He had been drunk driving and crashed his car into multiple parked cars, streetlights, and finally a building, doing ridiculous amounts of damage, but he was able to walk away and right to jail. After she booked him, in 4-inch heels I might add, her superiors freaked out and demanded she release him because of who he was. If I recall correctly, she told them they would have to do it themselves. Pretty sure all the charges were white, and he went home that night. She quit shortly after the incident. Before that, she was in the Navy. After law enforcement, she became a trauma nurse, and now she's very happily retired. Story 15. My dad is a retired police officer. Before he retired, he was on his way to work when he noticed in his rear view a trooper coming up behind him like a bat out of hell, lights on and siren blazing. Just as any person would do, my father pulled into another lane to let the trooper pass. As soon as my father pulls into the other lane, the trooper slams on the brakes and proceeds to pull my dad over. The reason for pulling over my dad? He didn't use a turn signal when moving over to let the trooper pass. Now, if he had the time to pull my father over, he clearly wasn't in any true hurry and shouldn't be speeding, using sirens and lights. But I digress too much. Despite my father being in full uniform and explaining that he was getting out of the trooper's way, as he was very obviously in a hurry, he still got a ticket for failure to use a turn signal. My dad contested and went to court. The trooper didn't show up, nor did he file a report, so it was thrown out. Shortly after, my father learned that that specific trooper is nicknamed Trooper Diesel and is a notorious bum, even among his police comrades. Story 16. My mom told me once when she was a young hippie, she and her boyfriend ran from their apartment sans jackets in a Montreal snowstorm to get a bottle of wine at the dépanneur down the street. On way back, they were stopped by a couple of cops because being hippies and running was suspicious. They took them into an alley to question them, and did so for about 20 minutes, going over the bottle of wine story before finally letting my frozen mother go, but not her filthy long hair of a boyfriend. So Mom ran home, got his jacket, and brought it out. They refused to let her give it to him. So Mom ran home again and called the cops, going full damsel in distress about the terrible bullies who had forced her and her boyfriend into an alley, and wouldn't let him go or put on a jacket, and she was just so frightened, and didn't know what to do. Several squad cars flew in, sirens blaring. Lady, you called the cops on the cops? Why, yes, I did. Dealing with people who are breaking the law is what cops are for. Story 17. My story involves the arrest of a high-ranking officer's son. I pulled the car over for making a right turn on red. It was posted, no turn on red. I pulled the car over, and there were 3 teens in the car. 18 driver, 17 front passenger, 17 rear passenger. I asked for his driver's license and noticed a bottle of booze on the floorboard near the front passenger. Since they were all underage, I asked all occupants to exit the vehicle and detained the driver due to him claiming ownership of the alcohol. As I placed him in my patrol vehicle, he told me his father was a lieutenant of a neighboring police department. So I asked for his father's phone number and told him that I would release him to his father if he came and picked him up. After the call, I searched the vehicle, and underneath the driver's seat was a firearm loaded with one of the serial numbers filed away. I found another serial number and checked it. Stolen. So his father shows up and talks to me. I broke the news that his son was in possession of a stolen gun that happened to have an obliterated serial number. 2 major felonies. The fact there was a victim involved meant that I had to charge him with the crime. I called my supervisor out to the scene, which interrupted a full-blown argument. Our hands were tied behind our back. So because of the incident, 2 of our officers were arrested for minor traffic violations and sent to jail. It was a stupid feud war that lasted a few months until the lieutenant resigned from his position when the chiefs got involved. Story 18. I pulled over a red Corvette convertible with California plates for going almost 50 in a 30 miles per hour zone. I was a cop in Oregon. As I approached the Corvette, the driver flipped open his badge and showed it to me, not saying a word. I asked him for his driver's license. He looked down at his badge, not saying anything. I again asked for his license, and he asked me if I couldn't see his badge. I said that I could, and that I could also buy a badge off of eBay. He finally gave me his California driver's license. I gave him a ticket for speeding, and he complained and moaned and said he was going to write to my supervisors. He said this is why cops can't trust other cops. Never heard another word from the guy. Story 19. As a teenager, I got pulled over for speeding but did not get a ticket. The cop looked at my license and asked me, "Do you know J so-and-so?" And I innocently said, "Yes, that is my dad." The cop says, "Well, as a courtesy, we don't give tickets to other cops or their families," and he let me go with a warning. My dad is not a cop. Turns out there is a cop in my city with my same last name, J so-and-so. My dad's name is Jim so-and-so. I got super lucky. Story 20. I came to a road traffic accident involving a drunk driver driving a Mini. On my arrival, I found the Mini wrapped around a tree and the driver pissed as a rat. As I approached him, he vomited and fell on the floor. From the line position, he reached inside his jacket and drew out his police ID. He was a detective, and he told me to piss off. I asked him to take a breathalyzer, and to which he told me to get lost. So I arrested him and took him to the police station. I discovered that he was a detective chief superintendent. Well, he lost his job and screwed his life up. Tough crap. You should have thought of that before you decided to drink. That's a wrap for this video. Make sure to leave your relatable story down in the comments. I would love to make a video on them. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time.